Does God answer self-serving prayers? We'll talk about that in a minute. Hey, I'm Mike. This is Temple on Wheels. Thanks for joining us today. We're on the banks of the Mississippi River, the mighty Mississippi. We came here because I wanted to see Hannibal, Missouri. It is the boyhood home of Samuel Clemens. Most of us know him as Mark Twain, the author of The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn and The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. And we went to that town to see those sites, the boyhood home, and a lot of the things that Mark Twain wrote about are right there. Even though the stories were fiction, he was looking at actual structures and places, and we got to go and see some of that stuff, and it was fun. And the reason we came here was because of that, but we found a campground to stay in Quincy, Illinois. And oh, what a treasure Quincy, Illinois is. It's just across the river, maybe 15 miles apart. And you may have heard of it because it hosted a presidential debate. But it's not one you saw on TV. It was the Lincoln-Douglas debate in the 1860s. May have been the first presidential debate. I'm not real sure about that. But it's still talked about today. And it was quite a festival of activity when that debate took place. And there's evidences of that all over this town. And it's a beautiful, beautiful town with bridges, as you can see in the video. And I wanted to talk a little bit today about prayers that ask for things from God that prosper us, and is He okay with that? So let me read you one in 1 Chronicles chapter 5, verse 20. It said, God granted their urgent plea because they trusted Him. Well, who is they in that urgent plea? It's the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half-tribe of Manasseh, and they took the land outside of what was called the Promised Land because it was better for them to raise their sheep and the livestock that they had, because that's the kind of, they were sheep herders primarily. And they liked that land and asked specifically to stay there and not go into the Promised Land. And that was all worked out and approved. And the reason that they had an urgent cry to God is because there were people living in that land that were oppressing them, and they were trying to remove them from that. And so they were armed. There were 44,000 of them, and they captured 100,000 men and like 50,000 camels and 20,000 sheep, and on and on and on. So God answered and granted their prayers. The other one is in 1 Chronicles chapter 4, verses 9 and 10. And let me read it to you, and I'll talk about it a little bit. Jabez was more honorable than his brother, and his mother named him because she bore him in pain. Jabez called on the name of God, saying, bless me and enlarge me, and keep me from harm, that I may not bring harm to anyone. So many of you may recognize this as the Jabez prayer. Where this comes from in Chronicles is this sea of genealogies. The first 9 chapters of 1 Chronicles is a genealogy, and it's mind-boggling. And both of these kind of put the brakes on as you're reading through them, because it stops talking about he's the son of, he's the son of, he's the son of, and says Jabez was more honorable than his brothers. And so it makes you focus on that a little bit. And a lot of you have heard of the Jabez prayer, but God granted his prayer, as far as we know, that his territory be enlarged, and that he not cause pain to anyone else. And I want to talk real quickly about David. And he went to a priest named Ahimelech, and he was a priest at Nob, and the priest said, what are you doing here alone? And David was on the run from Saul, and David said, I'm doing a little something for the king. Need to keep it on the QT. I need some bread and I need some weapons. And Ahimelech gave him some bread from the temple, and he also gave him the sword that David had taken in his battle with Goliath. Well, when Saul the king heard about this, he was in a rage, and he sent men to kill those priests. There were 85 priests that were actually killed as a result of that little white lie that David told. And that was a lesson, I think, for David to say, in some of his laments, God, teach me your ways. Teach me how to not do things like this. So remember this as you're walking your walk with God, that he will teach us his ways. Hey, I'm Mike. This is Temple on Wheels. Thanks for joining us today. See you next week.